Welcome, folks. As I mentioned, I'm Lena. I am joined today by my colleagues Tyler and Simone. Tyler and then Simone, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to meet everybody. I'm Tyler on the customer team over here at Linear. Been with the team about 2 years, and in my role, I primarily help new or prospective Linear teams to go through pilots, help them with setup, and then help with commercial conversations.
And I'm Simone, also on our customer team. I've been at Linear for about a year and a half now. I often work with teams using Linear through their onboarding and implementation process, and am a long term partner as you scale and evolve your workflows over time with a growing team on Linear. So I often work with folks on new features and kind of thinking about how to update their processes as they grow over time.
To give you a sense of what to expect today, this workshop is really for those of you who are working on getting your team to adopt Linear, or maybe considering adopting it yourself, and who are about to enter into this trial piloting period. So, Tyler and Simone will be walking you through how to really make the most of this time. And if you're trying to win over people in your company because you love Linear and maybe they haven't tried it yet, we'll give you some tips on that as well. I'm going to hand it over now to Tyler, and he's going to give us an introduction of how to pitch Linear to your teams and what to expect and how to prepare for your pilot.
Yeah, perfect. Again, excited to be chatting with everyone. I guess some additional context here. I've been working with a number of teams at Linear for a few years on running pilots. I worked with everything from small startups to large kind of SaaS enterprises to move hundreds or thousands of users over. So today, what I really want to do is help you start to formulate like how can you actually pitch Linear to your team? How can you get approval for the initial pilot? And how can you make that pilot successful and convince the org as a whole to switch over to Linear? And I think the good place to start here is with the most important question, which is why should my team actually switch to Linear? What are the key benefits that we need to actually promote? And the reasons for this are going to differ from team to team. So we recommend taking some time ahead of actually approaching your leadership or pitching Linear to really clarify and define a few points. So first, you're going to want to outline the key benefits of actually using Linear. And it's really important here to tie in the value of the product to your team versus just focusing on features or a spec sheet. So for example, Linear is incredibly fast. It has real-time performance. But instead of just bringing that as a bullet point to the table, you can go a layer deeper and really focus on how that speed will materially impact the business. So, for example, that can be by removing frustration for developers who are just sitting there looking at loading screens all day, waiting to get their work done. Well, removing that barrier can lead to a lot of efficiency gain for the team. Or it can be positioned as actually incentivizing team members to have more engagement and track more work in the tool, which for your leaders can translate to having greater visibility into the work or just more confidence in the reporting, knowing that everything is actually being tracked in Linear. So if you're looking for more inspiration here, instead of going through all the benefits, what I recommend is on our customers page, we have a number of stories from customers like Scale AI, Vercel, and many others that you can check out. Each one usually focused on a different key benefit. I recommend reading through some of those, seeing if any really resonate with maybe where your team is at or what you think the team might respond to. And then you can start to build those into the presentation for the stakeholders who are ultimately going to probably give approval and commit to the pilots. So as you put the presentation together for your stakeholders, in addition to these key benefits, you're also going to want to try where possible to layer in data that will support your thesis for Linear. And this data can come from a few different areas. On the Linear side, we actually do have some resources that can give you examples of data that we've pulled after doing surveys with a number of different customers and pulling data from our customers' usage data. An example there might be what we've actually found is that teams who move over to Linear, looking at their data from their previous tool versus what they've done in Linear, they tend to create almost 2 times the tickets on average, and the number of users who actually create tickets goes up almost 4x. So really good data to kind of drive home that adoption point if that does become a key benefit. But another area I actually recommend looking is at your current tool's usage data or just other data points that you can find that might support your thesis. A good example here, actually, speaking of Scale AI, when we were looking at their current usage on on the tool before Linear, what we found was that there was a large number of users that never created an issue, and a large number of folks, even on the EPD side, who were logging in maybe once a week to the current tool. So finding those kind of data points to layer into the presentation is awesome because it does really create the incentive and that data-backed decision-making for your leaders to hopefully greenlight a pilot for Linear. And then finally, as you're building that presentation, you are going to want to account for some potential objections that are going to come up. And in terms of the objections that you'll hear, the most common one that will come up in some flavor is going to be about a disruption of a pilot or disruption of potential migration. And I usually find that a lot of this place comes from just a fear of maybe like past migrations that teams have gone through, or leaders just really concerned that things are going to go off the rails. But what we actually find is that when people actually get into Linear and they go through the migration process, it tends to be a lot easier than they expect. And part of this is due to just how Linear is built. We have a really approachable UI, we have opinionated workflows, and those really help you to set up the platform quickly and then lower the learning curve. But in addition to that, we have a lot of tools, both from the Linear team directly, as well as pre-built options that you can use to help support your pilot integration. Some examples of these includes the ability to do a free pilot on Linear. So that can be using our free plan tier, or if you reach out to the Linear team, we can definitely give you some free credit for a few months of access so teams can evaluate and make sure the decision's clear. We also have API-based importers for most of our common competitors in the issue tracking area that can easily bring over your data and your users, both active for the pilot as well as historical data, if you do want to maintain that after you cut over to Linear. And then finally, oftentimes we do hear something like in the middle here that changing software is too disruptive and that during the pilot we might lose data. Linear has developed some bidirectional sync integrations for different issue trackers that you can set up to make sure that during the pilot, the Linear workspace and your older workspace or older tool stay in sync. So that way there's no data loss. And ideally you can pitch this to your leadership as a pretty low disruption effort to actually test out a new tool that could have big benefits for the team. So having some of these answers in your back pocket when you go to pitch Linear, it will go a long way to overcoming these objections. And now that you've defined why the team should use Linear, the overall business impact, and those solutions to common objections, we can start pitching Linear to the team and actually get approval for a pilot. And I think it's good to just emphasize, like when we're talking about this initial presentation, it isn't to in one fell swoop get everyone to agree or switching tools and changing course. That's usually a bigger hurdle to overcome. What we're just trying to do at this stage to get approval for a pilot so that you can actually get real users in the tool, build some advocates through that process, and actually come away with some specific data points on why Linear is better for the team. So let's jump forward and actually talk about what it means to run a pilot in Linear. So we're fast forwarding here. You've got an approval to run a pilot now, and you need to start building out a plan for how you're actually going to test the tool. And here we have a timeline that gives you a general overview of the steps we typically recommend to run a successful pilot. We've done some version of this with a lot of different customers. I can say the success rate is really high, especially if we get a lot of good engagement from the teams that are going to be involved in the pilot. But the general steps you want to go through is one, picking the teams that you do want to actually be in the pilot. It should not be a one size fits all. Everyone just jumps and starts using the tool. We do recommend a bit more structure than that. Two, you're going to want to make sure that you survey your users both before and after the pilot to get their general impressions of the current tool versus their experience in Linear during the pilot. We'll talk a bit more about that and give some examples here. Next, you'll want to make sure that you set up your pilot workspace correctly. So that can be importing current data the team's working on, maybe current sprint data, current projects, just to make sure that they feel at home when they get into the tool. And then finally, at the end of the pilot, you want to try to compile both anecdotes from the users, the results of your surveys, to put together a proposal to bring it to leadership to actually get commitment to move the team onto Linear. So now we're going to go through quickly some of these points, starting with actually picking that team or teams that are going to be a part of the pilot. So we do recommend to be a bit selective about the teams that are included. And in my experience, I find that sort of the best range is usually anywhere from 2 to 3 teams, encompassing usually around 10 to 15 people. This tends to be a pretty good mix of maybe folks from different departments or organizations across your company. Plus, you should be able, with that amount of folks, to layer in different disciplines, product, engineering, and design. In terms of like what you should be looking for like the perfect team to pilot Linear, I'd say first and foremost is just folks who are open-minded to using a new tool. You probably don't want the fanatical Jira advocate to be the one running this pilot or running their team in the pilot. Instead, you want folks who are maybe open to a new way of doing things and folks who probably align or understand the benefits that you've already pitched the team on. Second, you do want folks who are going to be vocal champions. So people who both during and after the pilot are probably going to be able to promote like, hey, I like this, I did this was cool about Linear. It can really kind of capture like what that difference felt like outside of maybe the surveys that were already going to run. And then last, and arguably the most important, is actually just finding a team that has a relatively easier time testing tools. And this can specifically be teams that are maybe generally newer to the organization, are a bit more tool agnostic, or are in a situation where maybe their workflows don't depend quite as heavily on other cross-functional teams that rely on the current tooling's workflows. A good example here in the teams we've had a lot of success with is usually like newer AI or ML teams, because they do tend to be newer to the org. They don't already have all their processes set in stone, and they tend to be open to adopting, new workflows or testing out new tools for the company. So as you're thinking about this, if there's folks you already have in mind, feel free to shoot a message afterwards about Linear. Otherwise, a little hack I found in the past is if you're just not really sure where to start, if you have Slack or Teams, you can actually just search for Linear internally. You'd be surprised how often there are other folks already talking about Linear at your company that maybe you can grab on and have them join the bandwagon. So now that we've actually grabbed the teams that we want for the pilot, it is going to be important to set the right expectations for them. Because the truth is that even the most detailed and structured of pilots, they're still going to have some rough edges here and there. There may be times during the evaluation that these teams need to jump back and forth between different tools because there's certain contexts or pieces of information that just aren't syncing over. And there will be a commitment to learning a new workflow and a new tool during this time that's going to put some additional pressure on those folks. So we strongly recommend, like during this time, just to make sure that everyone feels comfortable in the tool, you set up continuous check-ins with the team, usually on a weekly basis if you're running, say, a 4 to 6 week pilot. And then additionally, from the Linear side, we do have folks like myself, we have a full team, Simone as well, who can help set up specific trainings for the team, answer questions, and if interested, maybe you set up like a shared Slack channel, just so we can do like async Q&A to make sure people are unblocked and working productively during the pilot. And then in terms of the surveys that were mentioned, I'd say this is probably pretty novel for a lot of folks that have maybe done this as part of a pilot before. But one thing that we found to be really successful in convincing organizations or really just showing the value of Linear to the organization is running 2 surveys. One before your pilot, in which you're going to pose questions to the team about their impressions of the current tool that you're using. And then one afterwards, where you take those same questions, same format, and you pose them to the team about their impressions of Linear. And ideally, as we're able to show this before and after effect, it's an upward, no pun intended, linear curve, where the team is saying, hey, we actually believe Linear better impacts us in these areas that we care about and provides a net win for the team. So we do have a couple of examples here of questions that you might be able to ask. I usually recommend you tie these back again to those key benefits you originally pitched the organization on. So for example, the one we used earlier, if you're going to try to run questions that focus on the adoption or engagement or usage level of the teams, then you might post questions that ask them, hey, with the current tool, how frequently do you actually log in versus Linear? Did you find yourself using it more? Did it feel easier to get in and use the tool? Or you might be asking them, like, did you actually feel like you tracked more work in Linear during this pilot versus maybe on the current tool, you were finding yourself oftentimes frustrated about how hard it was to maybe log data or find the right data and just avoided it altogether. Next, we have one more example here. Similarly, this is going to be how you can gauge if the visibility of the tool is improving, how well the team can actually understand projects and road mapping. We do find that a lot of issue trackers are very focused on that like issue level execution work versus Linear, per comparison, is also meant to be a project planning tool. So you can encompass your team's roadmaps or higher level initiatives or epics in the same tool where that execution work is being tracked. So as an example, you can ask your team, hey, scale of 1 to 5, does this work actually map to my output? Or maybe are there spreadsheets flying around that are actually more representative of what I'm doing day to day and not shared visibly with the teams. One last call out is we do have a template bank of potential survey questions. So this is kind of a starting point for you. It's about 20 questions that you can mix and match or adjust based on maybe the benefits you want to highlight. But in the meantime, I'm going to hand it over to Simone to talk about how you can inventory your workflows and set your workspace up for success.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. I'm going to be expanding on a few of the topics Tyler mentioned. For the most part, I'll be demoing out of a linear instance. What I want to talk to you about for this section is what are the kind of key areas of your workflows that you need to assess to ensure that you're effectively making good use of your pilot and, thinking ahead for what will need to be transitioned when the time comes, which stakeholders need to have their use cases vetted in advance, and again, just really making the most of your time during a pilot. So I would say there's three key thematic areas that we'll cover. The first is issue intake and integrations, making sure you're moving any existing systems into Linear and also taking advantage of some novel tools that Linear offers. I will also talk about reporting. So making sure you're supporting any kind of key reporting use cases you have for sharing out team performance and output and trends over time. And then I also want to talk a little bit about cross-team workflows as well and supporting cross-team workflows. So with that, I'll go ahead and take over the screen share, Lena. And all right, so you guys should be seeing my Linear demo workspace right now. Let's start with the topic of issue intake and integrations. From the settings page in Linear, so in this demo workspace, if I go to the top and look into preferences, you'll see that there is an integrations page. This is a good starting point to just kind of like get a sense for what's out there. We also have a integrations directory online as well that you can reference. But you'll see here, which integrations are natively offered by Linear, and also some other common integrations that teams might use. For the most part, what I see is that the key integrations you'll want to test during your pilot are focused on supporting the intake of issues from other teams and other tools. So think about, taking bugs that have been reported in Slack and bringing them into Linear, or supporting your customer-facing teams like customer support with bringing customer-reported issues or feature requests into Linear. So let's start with that as a topic. Going back, so I'm going to go into this example engineering team over here on the left as an example. What we're looking at right now is this triage page. And this is the kind of key feature you'll want to enable in the teams that are testing Linear to understand how they'll be able to build workflows around incoming unplanned work being reported by other teams and stakeholders. So triage is a feature that you can opt into for your teams. You don't have to. But once it's enabled, any issues being reported from an integration or from someone who's not a direct member of your team will be sent to this triage page for intake management. So this means you'll be able to view these issues, ask for more information, reject them, or formally accept them into your backlog and into your planned work. So there's a couple examples of integrations here on this page. So right now we're looking at an issue that you can see here has been reported through Zendesk. So Zendesk and Intercom are two of our most common, customer support facing integrations. What you'll see here is that an issue was reported in Zendesk and the customer support agent took that and turned it into a Linear issue, which shows up in the triage for engineering. This is a very bare bones example, but you can enable templates in this workflow to ensure that folks are sharing the right relevant information. From here, you could take this issue and say, okay, this is a real issue. I'm going to mark it as in progress. And then ultimately, when you mark this issue as done, it will send a notification back to Zendesk to inform your support agent that that issue has been addressed, so they can update the customer accordingly. This is definitely worth exploring, in part because it will help you assess, who actually needs seats in Linear. Can your customer support team rely entirely on the Zendesk integration to have that line of communication? Or would it make sense for them to also be partners within Linear as well? Something to help you kind of think about planning for post-pilot seat provisioning. Another example I'll show here, you can see this bug report. If you look down in the activity history for this bug report, you'll see that this issue was created from asks. Asks is one of our Slack integrations, which enables a really streamlined workflow for bringing issues and requests reported in Slack into Linear. It can be used by folks who don't have access to Linear. So really, it's a great way to connect, with folks where they're operating, be that in Slack or in Linear. You'll see here that this issue automatically includes a link to the Slack thread where this issue was generated, and it shows up as this synced thread here. So I could respond here and ask for more information from the original requester. And this will actually post back to Slack. And that user in Slack can respond in turn, and I'll see that message here in Linear. So our Slack integrations are really a great tool for cohesively capturing conversations around work that might be occurring in both Linear and Slack and creating like a shared record on the issue level. So that is issue intake and integrations with our triage feature. Something I'll call out here is that for most of these integrations, so for this example I just showed from Asks and the Zendesk example, you can enable these integrations with specific templates. So I'm going to open up the issue creation module and we'll look at one as an example, this bug report template. For my workflow, I've made this template available in Zendesk and available in Slack so that when folks report these issues, it's accurately capturing the right information. And part of that here is this bug label. So this brings us to the topic of reporting and how you can facilitate reporting on the metrics that matter most to you. What I would recommend that you do is take inventory of any kind of reporting you do today. What are any kind of high-level summaries you provide on team output and performance? Maybe how long it takes to respond to a bug report. Maybe it's the amount of time spent on bugs versus feature requests. Whatever it might be, you'll kind of want to compile that list so you can think about how you want to standardize the way that teams operate in Linear to support that. So templates are a great example of how you can standardize reporting workflows. You can create these on a team-by-team basis or create them to be shared across the workspace. Labels are another great example. So this label here, bug, is part of a label group called issue type. And you can see there's some sub-labels like bug, design, feature request, improvement, etc. Having this kind of label group enabled makes it really easy to pull reports on, how many issues are being generated that we would classify as bugs versus feature requests, etc. So let's actually take a look at what reporting in Linear can look like so you can start to get a sense for how you might want to think about what your options are and the types of standard workflows you'll want to enable. So I'm going to click into this Cycles page for the engineering team. Cycles is our answer to sprints. You can create these kind of like standard workflow windows for your team. So maybe like a 2-week sprint with a 1-week cooldown, like you see here. This is custom according to your team's operating preferences. And it's a really great way to capture performance and output over time. Some of this is done automatically. So you can see here that for this sprint, I can see how the scope of that sprint has changed over time. So this gray line at the top. I can see how the work started has changed over time. So it looks like there was an increase from yesterday to today in the number of issues started. And then this purple line here shows me how much work has been completed. And the dashed line shows the projection over time. So am I going to complete the full scope of issues in my cycle? This by itself could be considered a report, but I want to go a level deeper. Let's click into this cycle here and look at these issues. For any issue page in Linear, anywhere where you see a list of issues, you have the option to open this Insights toggle in the top right corner. This is our analytics tooling, which is natively embedded in Linear and is where you'll probably pull the bulk of your day-to-day reporting to kind of track team progress over time. This lets you do something really simple like measure issue count, so the number of issues that are assigned to each team member. And then maybe I want to see that split out by that label group issue type. Now I can really easily see for members of my engineering time, how are they dedicating their time? Who's working on bugs? Who's not working on bugs? Who may have capacity? Or maybe I want to look at this instead of by issue type, I could look at this by project. So I can see how are the members of my team spread out in terms of the times they're dedicating to different projects. So it looks like Tyler here is focusing more of his time on this MIC release. So 60% of his issues are focused on that project. Having good labels and good templates makes it easier to pull interesting reports here. So definitely something that you'll want to consider. We also offer some native reporting that's more focused on issue trends. So I mentioned that triage filter. I'm going to go ahead and reset this. An out-of-the-box report that we provide is this triage time report. So you can kind of see, okay, for each of my different statuses, like my issues that are in progress or my issues that are in review, how long, generally speaking, does it take to triage those issues? And I can see an outlier here. There was a bug report here that took a month to triage. And this is a great way to spot outliers and kind of understand any trends in team performance. So we've talked about integrations, intake, and reporting. Definitely features that I heavily recommend you assess during the pilot so you can make sure you're properly mapping your existing workflows into Linear. Just taking a pause there. Were there any questions in the chat we wanted to make sure we cover? No, not just yet. All right. So moving on, the third theme I would consider here in terms of mapping your existing workflows into Linear is how best to support cross-team collaboration. What we've talked about so far, issue intake and analytics, are kind of focused on an individual team's use cases, but our projects feature allows you to understand and support collaboration across teams on a shared body of work. Projects, if you use Jira, you might be used to thinking of these as epics, are a body of work with a distinct delivery date, maybe something like a feature request, where multiple teams might be contributing over a long window of time. Creating a project in Linear is really simple. All you need is a team, a title, and a status, and you can spin up the emptiest version of a project. This too can be templatized, so you can apply templates to kind of standardize the way that your team conducts project work. But these can be very bare bones and simple from the start. And I call that out because in Linear, something that we make really easy is for you to conduct the project planning workflow from start to finish. You might be used to using your issue tracker just to track work that's already been scoped. So maybe you define and brainstorm around your projects and then actually go into your issue tracker and create the corresponding issues. We make it possible for you to run that process from start to finish in Linear. Something you can do here is you can configure these custom project statuses to kind of represent different phases of your project work. And this is something you'll want to think about how best to standardize across teams so that you can have a shared view of what project is underway across the various collaborators in the different teams that are using Linear. So for example, here at Linear, we have a couple different early stage statuses like idea or discovery, so that we have these places to brainstorm and collaborate on potential areas of work. So let's look into one of these as an example. Here's a very built out project. We can see it's in progress. And there's two key pages here. We can see the overview of this project and the issues page. We're going to talk about the overview. This is where you'll want to think about, what are your processes today for defining your projects and creating visibility across different stakeholders into project progress and context over time. We make it possible to include all context related to a project from this overview page. You can either, write out context within the long form description of a project. So that's what you see here. It's kind of the description of the scope. You can also add documents in Linear here under resources. So you'll see, for example, something like a meeting notes doc, and you can link out to external resources. So this will be your hub for kind of housing all of the context related to a given project. So this might be something that you're doing today across like Google Docs, spreadsheets, and your issue tracker. You'll want to assess if you're able to consolidate all of that within Linear and within this project object. Something else that I would call out as part of thinking about project planning and supporting a standard process for running projects in Linear is our project updates feature. So over here on the top right, you'll see that there's this little activity toggle. This is where I can go in and kind of see the history of changes to this project. And that includes these subjective project updates. Let's expand this a little, make it easier to see. We have this project updates feature, which allows a project lead to go in and say, is my project on track, at risk, or off track? And to write an update here that will also pull in any underlying changes to the project. This is a great tool because it will be, the foremost way that you keep stakeholders informed on a project's progress over time. And if you have one team who's currently in the pilot and is operating separately from the larger org, this can be a good way to keep people up to date on what's happening because these updates can be synced out to Slack. So here's an example. You'll see that this project update synced to this Slack thread or this Slack channel. And it's like that issue I showed earlier. If I post here and ask for an update, this posts to Slack, and any responses in Slack will come back to this thread as well. So it makes it really easy to keep all stakeholders involved in your projects over time. All right. There's one more project planning feature that I want to make sure that we highlight. Often we see that folks during the pilot want to try to find a way to best represent their roadmap or kind of high-level project overview in Linear. For that, I would recommend that you explore our initiatives feature up here at the top left. Initiatives are kind of like a project for your project. It's a subjective grouping of related projects that roll up to some kind of higher level goal. So that might be a large launch or some kind of OKR, or even just kind of like a thematic area of work that your company is focused on this year. So here's an example. We have this 2.0 launch, and this is where I can go in and kind of see, a long-form description of what this high-level initiative entails and a list of the projects included within it. And I call this out because initiatives is one of the main lenses that we see executive stakeholders use to engage with Linear. While your execs might not necessarily be involved in your pilot, it's helpful to think about, how they will be impacted by this transition and ways in which you'll be able to take advantage of Linear to give them better visibility into project progress and work against key OKRs and initiatives. The benefit of doing this in Linear is that all of the context lives in the same place where work is being done. So there's no need to kind of operate across two separate systems and have this lag where you're updating one system and then another. All right, so we've talked about issue intake and integrations. We've talked about reporting. We've talked about project process. All of these are areas that the customer team here at Linear would be happy to discuss with you in terms of mapping your current workflow into Linear and making the most of your pilot. One other area that is worth exploring during your pilot as well is the option to import issues from your existing tracker. So if we go to the settings page and we go to imports and exports, you'll see here that we offer a few different out-of-the-box import tools to Asana, Shortcut, GitHub, and Jira. This makes it really easy to bring existing issues and projects from your current tooling into Linear so that you can kind of predict how high lift will the transition be for your team when the time comes. This is something that's great to explore during the pilot so you can help paint a picture of how much work will be needed and how long it will take to actually move existing workflows into Linear. We do see that some folks use this as an opportunity to just cut straight over, but it's worth trying out one of these integration options to kind of explore and see, how your current workflow might map Linear. We could go into a lot of detail on each of these. They're both kind of unique, and it depends on how you're configured, how best to make use of them. But we have some great documentation we'll share with you guys on exactly what it looks like to use one of these. I'll also call it, if you do not use one of these tools today, we also have a CLI importer, which supports CSV import so that you can more flexibly map your existing issues and projects into Linear. Cool. I think my final call out here in this demo right now would be that for our Jira integration and our GitHub integration, we offer syncing functionality so that you can not only import, but set up an ongoing sync so that new issues created in GitHub or Jira are also created in Linear and vice versa, and updates are carried between the two tools. This makes it possible for one team to kind of operate separately while still maintaining visibility into their work in the original tool, if that's GitHub or if that's Jira. These can also be a great way to facilitate a gradual transition using sync to kind of like capture any changes that might get missed as folks move from one tool to the other. So definitely something that you'll want to explore as part of your pilot. Okay, so let's assume that you have run your pilot and you've been able to assess all of those key workflow areas that I mentioned, from integrations and intake to supporting project collaboration to reporting, and you started your import process to move teams over. I want to make sure we talk a little bit about the post-pilot process as well, and how you think about kind of like creating a synopsis of your learnings and takeaways to share back with the larger team. All right. So once you've run your pilot, we would recommend that you return to the survey you sent prior to starting the pilot and conduct a similar post pilot survey. So the same kinds of questions you ask the team about how they feel about their current tooling, you'll want to ask about the folks who have been using Linear throughout this window of time. Generally speaking, we just want to make sure you can gauge their impressions. Has this made their life easier? Has this made their life easier? We recommend including a mix of both quantitative and qualitative questions here. For the quantitative piece, that insights feature I mentioned allows you to actually pull metrics on how much work was completed, how productive folks were, how fast they were to complete issues. And that's something that you can pull from Linear to then compare to similar metrics you can pull from your existing tooling. We do recommend that you practice anonymity to ensure the best possible feedback. But these surveys really do tell a really compelling picture of how individuals at your company were influenced in the process of the pilot and help stakeholders understand, the benefits of potentially making a switch.
Any questions that come up after this, again, get in touch with sales and support. We also have a community Slack where you can kind of see those asks in action and talk to other users and see how they've adopted Linear. There's also an entire instruction manual online of everything that Tyler and Simone talked about today, plus even more, which you can access. And lastly, if this has piqued your interest and you want a more general onboarding and overview of Linear features, feel free to sign up for an onboarding session. I do them just about every week. Thanks,
Have a good one,
everyone.
y'all.
Take care.